My grandmother, my dad's mom, was born in 1918. She lived across two completely different ages, World War I to the 80s. When she was 8 years old, she traveled in a covered wagon. Now, of course, in the early 20th centuries, there were other ways to travel, but a poor family in the Deep South, and they had a lot of livestock, they walked. She went from covered wagons to rocket ships. In the 1970s, my grandmother bought a Mustang that she was driving around in the 70s. She grabs this cassette tape, she goes up to the counter, and there's a teenager behind the counter, and he says, "Ma'am, do you know what you're buying?" She says, No, actually I don't. I don't care. I just want to test out my new cassette player in my car. But ma'am, this is rock and roll. Turns out that cassette tape was Steve Miller Band, Fly Like an Eagle. She played that album over and over. I have memories of driving around in a Mustang listening to Steve Miller Band with my grandmother. She was an adventurer. She was an entrepreneur. She was also a mystic. She saw spirits. She was one of 10 children. She had quite a few older siblings who passed away before she did. And multiple times in her life, she would tell the story of being in the hospital, sitting at the bedside of a sibling who was passing, and looking up and seeing the spirit of their dead mother, my great-grandmother, walking down the hallway. She would tell all her siblings, "Come say your goodbyes. They're going to go tonight. Mom has come to get them." She was grounded in the modern scientific world in the space age, but also, she was a champion of her grandkids. She gave me a Time magazine, and it featured David Byrne, who lead of Talking Heads. And the title of this said, Renaissance Man. She desired that I aspire to be a Renaissance man, like not pigeonhole myself with respect to art, but just explore everything. Like this was what she was championing to me as a kid when I was 14. Now, how do we get to the rocket ships part? She worked for Sears and Roebuck Company, and she would design their window treatments for their curtains. And she did this for all the astronauts during the moon years. And that really impacted her. In fact, going to NASA was one of the things we did. She recognized that her life had spanned a period that covered the last trailing vestiges of covered wagons and the early years of the space age. We are now currently in a time of great transition. I want to put up my grandmother as an example of embracing change, and even if it's completely turns upside down your notion of the world, you'll survive it. One of the ways to do that is in this concept of the Renaissance. But it requires a destruction of the old before we can get to the new. It requires an incredible bravery to sort of go towards and lean in to that revolution of, the Renaissance. The advice I got from my grandmother was be a Renaissance person and embrace the changing of the ages. Embrace your own divergence and just go for it. Be a Renaissance person at the transition of ages. And that's what my grandmother taught me.